Exterior styling sells the vehicle, but the interior is where you have to live after you've purchased it. So goes the mantra of, I don't know quite who, but at least it sure seems to work that way. Exterior styling is often what draws customers into showrooms to take a look at a potential vehicle. But once somebody plunks down money and has to live with a vehicle every day, it's often the interior that they come to love or hate. Many of us, for instance, likely recall a car or a few vehicles where we didn't care for the interior, likely because it was pretty plasticky and the switchgear just didn't have great feel to it. The seats weren't overly comfortable. The fabrics weren't all that great. There was a lot of hard plastic, etc. Maybe even the fact that the interior was, like so many interiors are today, just simply black or plain gray. But regardless of what it is, that memory is indelibly etched into our minds. And on the flip side of that, memories are also made of vehicles that we knew and loved for a number of reasons, and in some cases, it might have been the interior. I would like to present to you now the case for what I believe are some of the most beautiful seats and seat fabrics in any interior that was ever made. Now, the entire interior was also relatively nice. It did have some shortcomings, which we'll discuss. But the seating in this vehicle, I think, is just absolutely world-class from an aesthetic standpoint. And that is the interior of the 1973 and 74 Oldsmobile Toronado. Now, I'm sure many of you recall the first generation and first year of the first generation, 1966 Olds Toronado, that really made a splash. And that car still remains one of the most seminal designs ever to have come out of the halls of General Motors or, in fact, the American automotive industry. But that design had run its course by 1970, and in 1971, Oldsmobile pivoted the Toronado to being a larger vehicle that was based on what was called an E-platform, but the E-platform now was forced to share many components, including the glass and the A-pillars, with the full-size General Motors B-body vehicles. Why would Oldsmobile mess with the formula on the first-generation Toronado in creating the second-generation Toronado, you might ask? Well, the truth of the matter is that the first-generation Toronado really wasn't the commercial success that Olds was hoping for, nor was it the overly profitable vehicle. Its front-wheel drive drivetrain forced an additional $500 of cost upon the vehicle, and that's in 1966 dollars, so about $5,000 of incremental cost today, and Oldsmobile simply just couldn't charge enough to recover that cost. Another factor that likely went behind the decision to bloat the Toronado to this more full-size platform vehicle from its former dimensions likely is owed to the fact that General Motors knew that the time to really rely on performance was fast waning. This was a time when insurance companies were starting to crack down on vehicles with high horsepower. It was also a time where emissions regulations were becoming much more prevalent, and the auto companies knew that the days of performance were really going to be numbered. So the days of performance are numbered, and you have a vehicle that really is known in the marketplace as a sporty personal luxury coupe. What are you to do but to lean in far more to the luxury side of the vehicle equation than to the sporty side of the equation? Thus, the 1971 Toronado. The 71 Toronado was bigger and also had a completely different design philosophy from the 66 Toronado. Interestingly, though, it didn't have a different design philosophy from the 1967 Eldorado, which was the Tornado's platform mate. If you take a look at the side view in particular of the 71 Toronado, you'll notice that the side view highly resembles that of the 1967 Eldorado. Of course, the rear end is devoid of the plan view V-shaped backlight that the 67 Eldorado has, but the overall lines and forms are pretty gosh darn similar. And it's the same out back as well. The 71 Toronado is an often forgotten vehicle in the Oldsmobile lineup and in General Motors history, but it was a commercial sales success, and much more so than the 66 to 1970 Toronado. In fact, the next generation Toronado that was produced from 71 to 78 tended to sell about double the number of units every year that the 1966 to 70 version did. So despite the fact that designers and collectors now love the 66 Toronado, it was actually the 71 to 8 Toronado that was highly commercially successful and also profitable. I personally like the 1971 and 72 Torenados in particular, and the front ends as well as the rear ends on them, as this was before the U.S. federal bumper standards were introduced. Those came into play on the front for 1973, where automakers had to meet a 5-mile-an-hour impact standard, and on the rear in 1974, where they had to meet a 5-mile-an-hour impact standard out back. However, the 1973 to 74 Torenados still have a relatively handsome exterior. You'll note up front in these pictures of a 1973 Toronado that it still has those inlets, if you will, on either outboard side of the vehicle. Of course, they're now sitting behind the bumper as opposed to being more nicely integrated because that bumper has to absorb the impact associated with hitting a front barrier at 5 miles an hour. Out back, the Toronado also got very vertical taillights a la 1967 Eldorado, and it did have high-mounted stop lamps as well, which were introduced for the 1971 model year. Buick would eventually copy these when the boat tail was, de-boat-tailed in 1974, in order to give the back end of that vehicle a little bit of pizzazz as well. But the really interesting story of the Toronado is not necessarily the exterior design for 1973 and 74. By the way, here's a picture of a 1974 Toronado, and you can see a few different design changes in the front. But the story is the interior that was redesigned for the 1973 model year. Now, I should clarify a little bit what I mean by redesigned interior, as this Toronado didn't have a completely redesigned interior for 73, but it did have all new seating and new door panels in 73. And then in 1974, the dash was revised as well. So kind of got a new interior in two different phases. And I have to say the revised seating and door panels that came out for the 1973 model year were far more ornate than those that they replaced. I suspect this is one of the reasons that Oldsmobile made such a dramatic change to the interior of the 73 Toronado, in that the 71 and 72 Toronado interiors really just don't look very special for what was the most expensive car in the Oldsmobile lineup. I surmise that Oldsmobile division management asked designers to come up with at least some new seating and door panels for the 1973 model year as a way to gussy up the interior and make it a little bit less drab, which, again, I think the 1971 and 72 interiors, whether they're the standard interior or the custom interior, really don't look too rich. And while I have to admit, it appears the designers delivered. Take a look at these beautiful seats for 1973 and compare them to what was offered on the Toronado 1971 and 72. It just simply is no comparison. The beautiful button tufting and surfacing on these 1973 seats, I think, is one of the most opulent and gorgeous seating designs in all of GM and maybe even American automotive history. Let me know what you think if you agree with me. This design also looks timeless today and like it would be at home in any modern car, but for the fact that, of course, every modern car today has to have seats that hug you so you can go around corners really fast, which I personally don't know why that is something that every single vehicle today has to have. The careful eye will also observe the very ornate door panel with intricately detailed door pole designs and the lavalier strap that was added in the back on the C-pillar for 1973 in the Toronado. So my guess is that Oldsmobile General Management gave the designers some extra dollars to work with, because this interior clearly costs more than the 71 to 72 interior, and believe me, it's rare that designers get more money toward an interior over the life of a car versus being asked to take some of the money out. Now, as I mentioned, not all of the interior was new for 73. In particular, the instrument panel was really a carryover of the 71 and 72 design, although strangely, the instrument panel top hat is different from the Toronado to the Delta 88 as well as the 98, particularly on the passenger side, as well as the air vents are different. Not sure why Oldsmobile thought that just differentiating that part of the instrument panel would make people think they're an entirely different car, as the driver-centric cockpit theme and the two-spoke steering wheel was shared across the 88, 98, and Toronado, but I guess that's the decision they came to. Of course, if you did get the Toronado, you got this kind of gold pattern on the instrument panel as well as the steering wheel. And you can see here, this particular vehicle is relatively well equipped with air conditioning. And it does have the cruise control setup where you flip the switch on the dash, then depress the button at the end of the turn signal stalk. And it does have the rear defogger. These cars could also be equipped with the Twilight Sentinel feature, which was effectively a feature that enabled the headlights to stay on for a period of time after the car was shut off. Oldsmobile called this Night Watch, and that would have been another toggle switch on the dash. A particularly strange touch that bestowed these interiors, and was true for the 1971 and 72 model years as well, is that only on the Torenados, the gas pedal as well as the brake pedal were color keyed to the interior. On the 88s and 98s, they were black, irrespective of the interior. So the picture you see here, you can discern that the pedals are red, and it's not a reflection of the carpet on the pedal. The pedals themselves, the molded plastic from which they are made, is in fact color keyed, as well as the emergency brake pedal. That was a really strange choice for Oldsmobile, but something that had been done in previous years, just not on other vehicles in the 1973 lineup for Oldsmobile. I'm sure the astute viewer has also noticed that the floor in this Toronado is conspicuously flat because, again, the vehicle was front-wheel drive. There consequently was no transmission hump or drive shaft running to the rear, and so passengers could get better comfort, particularly if you were seated 3 across, due to this front-wheel drive configuration. Here's a shot of the door panel for 73, and you notice that that upper portion of the door panel is particularly ornate as well. It was a marked improvement over the 1971 and 72 design, and a similar theme would bestow the 1974 Toronado. And here for reference is the 1974 Toronado interior. You notice the seat design is the same as the 73, and the door panels are very similar, but the instrument panel is completely changed, and it's lost a lot of that driver-centric nature that the 71 to 3 Toronado instrument panel had. Still has a bit of it, though. And it's not quite as attractive, in my opinion, especially the faux wood grain versus that gold backdrop, which I thought was extremely tasteful. And you'll notice that the 1974 Toronado has also lost something that I'm sure many buyers would have noticed: the color-keyed accelerator, brake, and emergency brake pedals. And before we conclude this segment on the 1973 Oldsmobile Toronado, I thought I would drop one other interesting tidbit of history on this vehicle. In 1973, the Toronado came equipped with a 250 net horsepower, 455 cubic inch V8 underhood, which you can see in this photo. And the interesting bit of trivia that I'll point out here is that 1973 and 1974 are the only years where the name Oldsmobile is stamped into the rocker covers on these 455s. So if you see that, you know it's a 1973 or 74 Olds engine. In 1975, that would go away once again. Hope you enjoyed this video on the 1973 Toronado interior. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you. Thanks again for watching.